Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Tech Snacks, with this episode's topic being what is PolyBase in SQL Server. Tech Snack is a series answering a single question per episode in not more than 5 to 10 minutes. Most of the questions getting answered are related to either Microsoft SQL Server or Azure, the Microsoft Cloud Platform. The question we're going to answer in this episode is: what is PolyBase in Microsoft SQL Server? PolyBase was first introduced in SQL Server 2016 as a data virtualization feature enabling SQL Server to access external data in Hadoop and Azure Blob Storage. The external data sources that can be accessed were extended in SQL Server 2019. PolyBase now supports external data in SQL Server, Oracle, Teradata, MongoDB, and basically any source that can be accessed using an ODBC driver. Before we go into detail about the implementation, let's first talk about the use cases, which should also make it clear why the feature was introduced in the first place. With increasing data sizes, a lot of companies don't store their data solely in relational databases, but also in data lakes like Hadoop. PolyBase enables such companies to still only use T-SQL for their data analysis and directly access all the data in Hadoop using Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, for example. Therefore, SQL Server acts as a single point of entry for all data-related queries. In addition to accessing the data in external systems, PolyBase is also being used to load data into SQL Server. Having source data in Hadoop and using a store procedure on a daily basis to load data into a SQL Server data warehouse is a new pattern that is often being used. But PolyBase doesn't only allow you to load data from external sources. Depending on your permissions, you're also able to export data to external systems. The same way data was loaded into a data warehouse using a store procedure could be leveraged to archive old data to Hadoop, Azure Blob Storage, or Azure Data Lake Store, which most probably runs on cheaper storage than your enterprise data warehouse. Let's go ahead and see how PolyBase can be configured to access data from a different SQL Server instance during a demo. All the code can be downloaded as an Azure Data Studio notebook from GitHub. First, we need to ensure that PolyBase is actually installed and enabled. No matter how many SQL Server instances are running on a single server, PolyBase can only be installed once on a machine. During installation, you must decide whether you're going to use a standalone instance or a scale-out instance. This is a decision that cannot be changed later. After the setup process, everything else can be configured using T-SQL. Select server property is PolyBase installed returns whether or not PolyBase is installed, and sp-configured can be used to enable PolyBase in the instance. This might not be needed in your installation, but if you're facing any issues during the creation of some of the later objects, make sure that PolyBase enabled is set to 1. For demo purposes, we are first going to create a new database that holds all the objects in this tech snack. The first step after installing and enabling PolyBase is to create a master key. The master key is a symmetric key used to protect the private keys of certificates and asymmetric keys inside of a database. For PolyBase, the master key is used to encrypt the secrets or passwords of the credentials used to connect to the external data source. We simply need to execute create master key encryption by password and specify a secure password. Make sure to not forget this password as it is required to restore the master key. The credential is the first PolyBase object we're going to create. Called a database scoped credential, it stores username and password for the external data source. Remember that the secret is encrypted by the master key created in the previous step. Using the create a credential called credential for SQL, we generate an external data source which contains the connection string for the underlying data source. One property for an external data source that can be specified is called pushdown, which allows queries to be pushed down to the source data. Pushdown by default is set to on. This feature transparently pushes where conditions to the external data source if the where predicate is one of the following: a binary comparison for numeric, date, and time values like equals, not equals, greater than, smaller than, and so on. Arithmetic operators like plus and minus. Logical operators like and or. Unary operators like not, is null, or is not null. Plus there are operators that might get pushed down. These are between, not in, and like operators. As the last step, we can create external tables, virtualizing the tables using the external data sources inside of our instance. All we need to do is execute a create external table statement, which is very similar to the common create table expression. In addition to the fields and their corresponding data types, we also need to specify the external data source to be used and the location in the form of database.schema.table or view. Once created, we can query the source data using a simple select statement. Depending on the source table we are trying to virtualize, the effort of creating the create external table command might be extremely time consuming, as we need to specify all the fields including their data types like we would for a create table definition, as you can see demonstrated with the dbo.dim account table. One way around that issue is to use Azure Data Studio and the data virtualization extension, which creates the script for us. Simply expand the connections pane, right-click on the database where we want to create an external table, select Create External Table and wait for the configuration pane to open. Once opened, we need to specify the data source type we would like to use. The extension currently supports only SQL Server and Oracle. We're going ahead with SQL Server and hit Next. As we have already created an external data source, we can simply select it in the drop-down menu. If we would not have created it in advance, the wizard could also create the database scope credentials and the data source for us. Once we have selected the external data source, SQL 2017, we can hit Next. We can now go ahead and expand AdventureWorks DB 2017 tables and select dbo.fact internet sales. Let's proceed with clicking Next. This view is giving us a summary of what we have selected and lets us create everything as displayed in the summary, or what makes even more sense, generate a script. We hit Generate Script and close the configuration pane. The script created is very similar to what we have created manually before, but has a try-catch block for some error handling. Once created, external tables can be queried as if they were tables inside of the database. The similar approach can be used to access other external systems as well. But coming back to our initial question, what is PolyBase? We can say that PolyBase is a data virtualization layer inside of Microsoft SQL Server, allowing SQL Server to access data in different external systems like Hadoop, Oracle, Teradata, MongoDB, or any other SQL Server instance. And that's it for the first episode of TechSnack. Thank you very much for listening and talk to you soon.